Ukrainian public is not going to accept it. Even without American support, even with the pressure from this administration, we are not going to stop for the simple reason, as I explained, we consider this war as a genocidal. And I don't know, I'm interested in history. I read a lot of things. I haven't heard of any cases of a negotiated solution to genocide.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of On the Edge. Our guest is Oleksandr Khara. He is a former advisor to the Ministry of Defense here in Ukraine. He was part of the diplomatic corps with an expertise in the United States, and he currently works as an analyst. With his intersection of all these various things, we were able to talk on a number of different topics. But unfortunately, as was always my concern in doing a weekly show, that there might be some changes if we started talking about more current affairs. And that's what happened. Shortly after, within about a 12-hour period after we sat down and recorded our conversation, the announcement came out that the current US Ambassador to Kiev, Brink, would be leaving. Now, she was appointed by the Biden administration. This means that the next ambassador will be most likely appointed by the Trump administration. We don't get a chance to talk about that, and you'll probably notice we had to make a couple of edits, but nevertheless, so much more of this interview, this sit-down conversation we have is still very relevant and I believe of use to you and informative to an audience that cares about Ukraine. So, Oleksandr, it's Khara?
It's Khara. Khara. It's a Greek name.
It's okay. Fair enough. It's the transliteration sometimes of the two different languages can get me in trouble. Let's just go right into the big picture question. What is your summation of the current relationship between the United States, in particular, but the Western Alliance, and Ukraine?
Well, I believe in the greater scheme of things, so we should talk about the rise of the East, particularly China, and certainly the necessity for Americans to reorient their resources and to deter China into the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it with the pivot to Asia policy of Obama administration. And actually, on their watch, there was annexation of Crimea and the proxy war in the Donbass. Mm-hmm. On their watch, there was the crisis in the Middle East, and particularly Russians filled the void in Syria mm-hmm. and reestablished in this strategically important region. So this shift is something real. Mm-hmm. But what we see is inadequate reaction of the United States to that. They are ready to abandon Europe. They are ready to abandon other regions and to allow weak agents like Russia to fill the void and to dictate something. And with this administration, let's start with the Biden administration. When Russians firstly threatened to invade Ukraine back in 2021, Biden thought that it was possible to negotiate something with Russia, and they decided to park Russia. So Russia was not ready to be parked. They saw an opportunity to annex or to subjugate Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And one of the green lights was the catastrophic withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So Russians and Chinese thought, well, here it is. The United States are not superpower anymore, and we can pursue it with our goals in our regions and strategically. And unfortunately, the Biden administration was deterred, self-deterred, I would say, and didn't help Ukraine prior to the invasion. They thought that some javelins and stingers would be enough to deter Russia. And they miscalculated the Russian strategic culture and readiness to pay the heavy price for the invasion. And then there were each and every month after the invasion, the dilemmas for Mr. Biden. He wanted to have a new status quo. Certainly, he wanted to stop Russians in Ukraine and to preserve Ukraine as a sovereign state, regardless of borders. He didn't want two things to occur. First, collapse of Russia. And it's something deeply into the mind of Europeans and Americans and elsewhere. So it's better to have one Führer of the Russian world in charge of all the nukes, biological, chemical weapons, not to mention the either 80 million or 140 million of Russians to keep them on their territory. And the second option was nuclear escalation from the Russian side. And the Russians were threatening that with that. So he missed this opportunity to help Ukraine back in 2022 when there was momentum of Ukrainian defense forces, and we were able to expel Russians at least from the territories they occupied after the invasion. And then it was certainly a strategic mistake not to provide Ukraine with let's say, air power and missiles that would need for the counteroffensive operation in 2023 that actually denied us ability to fight maneuverable war. It's the type of war that the United States or European NATO countries would fight if there was such a war. So we didn't achieve those strategic goals that we set.
If I may just interject, having been here and traveled here for as long as I have, this seems to be a recurring issue with the West. They're terrified of escalation within Ukraine. Absolutely terrified of it. I saw it on Maidan in 2014 and the Minsk Accords, which were nothing more than a Band-Aid and were never properly implemented because they're terrified. I really do. They have been terrified of the repercussions of this war kind of being decided either way, or this issue being decided either way. To my mind, as a Westerner, looking in on that, I think that's been a major problem in our capitals, is that we're both afraid of what happens if Russia wins, but we're also afraid of what happens if Russia loses. This has been a problem in my mind. I wonder what you think of that.
You're
perception.
Absolutely correct. This dichotomy exists and it hasn't vanished yet. And this presupposition that Russia is so huge and it's difficult to defeat it.
This force of nature, this inevitable, juggernaut that can't be resisted. Yeah.
But it happened several times, like during Crimean War in 19th century or Russo-Japanese War in 1905. There is a possibility to beat Russia. And we are...
Even the Pyrrhic victories that they had along the former Ottoman Empire areas in kind of the mid-19th century, which maybe they gained a bit of ground here or there, but it was at a huge loss to them. Anyhow, sorry to interrupt again. I get very frustrated with this concept of Russia as this, just this thing that cannot be stopped if it decides to roll.
Too big to fail. But fortunately, we've seen that Russia collapsed twice last century. And it will collapse for sure in 21st century. And certainly with this war, with this geopolitical overstretch, they're exhausting their resources. And actually, it's one of my thoughts that with this war, the Russians has lost the pillars of their imperialism. It was laid down in 16th century by two tsars, including John the Terrible. So the key pillars are Kiev as a mother of Rus cities. So they cannot think about themselves, and their statehood myth is based on Kiev, and Kiev should belong to Russia. The other thing is Crimea, because Volodymyr the Great was baptized in Crimea, and thus they believe that Russia became this Orthodox civilization. So they cannot control Kiev, and there is no chance they can get a control by military means. If they may succeed by political means, talking to President Trump and trying to impose capitulation, I would say, in form of peace treaty. So one thing is to get into to Kiev. The other thing, we are shifting the former Russian Orthodox Church into Ukrainian Church. So the Russians are losing parishes and believers, churches, and they cannot claim that they are center of Orthodoxy, because Ukraine was a major part. Not to mention that Ukrainians overall are more religious. They are attending churches not just Christmas time or in Easter. So Ukrainians really more conservative and religious than the Russians. So and Putin cannot propose anything original to its populace because he cannot be liberal for obvious reasons. He cannot sell to his population this idea of a great Rus being part of Russia and being roots of the Russian statehood. The third Rome, and they cannot, as they call, repeat, as they refer to the Second World War, and they believe that it was Soviet Union that won this war, not alliance, not Soviet Union with assistance from the United States, the Lend-Lease that was crucial, and it's not about just cigarettes and canned food.
They rode to Berlin on the backs of Studebakers.
Oh yeah, and all those asses who were fighting Germans in the skies, were fighting with on American planes. Not to mention, I can recall just one number. 10,000 metric tons of steel was exported from the United States to the Soviet Union to produce the most popular tank, T-34. So, and there were American tanks and many other things. So without American support, there was no chance for the Soviet Union to survive. They just admit it, and they don't like to mention that the United Kingdom, Great British Empire, and some others were fighting as well. And certainly there was war not just on the European continent, but in Africa, in the Pacific, and so on and so on. But they cannot repeat it. They showed it for 11 years since the legal annexation of Crimea and 3 years of this full-fledged invasion. They failed to subjugate Ukraine, even though we are fighting on our own. Certainly there are some foreign troops, I mean the volunteers who are fighting on our side, but they are not. It's not a huge portion of our defense forces. Certainly our Western partners are providing us with defense assistance, but it's not we're just like trying to fill the gap in capabilities, because certainly Russia started this war as a huge military power in terms of material and other things and industrial production, but now they need support from China for dual-use goods, Iran
or
for
the
drones,
DPRK, or Iran for drones.
Yeah, and recently we've seen some Chinese soldiers. I'm not sure whether they were official Chinese soldiers or just volunteers. It doesn't matter, but they cannot fight Ukraine without external support. So what I'm saying that for Putin, even if this war is over on preferable terms for him, he will not be able to provide his populace with some good ideas what to build, because Russia is not liberal and it cannot be conservative in reality. Because if you have a look at the number of abortions, the drug addicts, tuberculosis, and many other things.
Alcoholism.
Yeah, so it's not a conservative power, and growing population of Muslims from the northern Caucasian republics and influx of those from the Asian republics. And certainly it's not a huge economic power. The Russian miracle is based on the export of commodities, first and foremost gas and oil, to Europe and to some other countries. So that's why Russia will be in crisis no matter what happens to the front line or whatever. And I don't believe that the reset that Mr. Trump thinks to have will help Putin, because Trump is not going to invest billions or trillions of dollars into the Russian economy. He would rather try to get access to these resources and just like enrich Americans rather than help Russia to rebuild its empire. So that's why in broader scheme of things, Russia is on decline, even though it seems that it's capable to fight on against us. It's capable of provoking NATO. And I believe it's a high probability, even now, with decimated forces. They may occupy, let's say, 10 square kilometers of Estonian territory, put their tactical nukes, and try to negotiate with the West new security architecture in Europe. And I don't think that Trump, that hardly can find Estonia on the map, would agree to risk the Third World War for Estonia, even though Estonia pays more than 2% of their GDP for defense. So now we see this with this administration, with simplified worldview, in general, in particular to this particular region. And we've seen it with Mr. Witkofff, who returned from meeting with the Russians and producing crap about history and the reasons for this war, like Russia reacted because Ukraine was almost a member of NATO, and NATO wanted to conquer Russia. So the Russian speaker, I'm native of Donetsk, so I'm Russian speaker. I'm not the ethnic Ukrainian, I'm Greek. But certainly we built our identity not on the language or our ethnicity. We are talking about political nation. So I'm Ukrainian because I like this identity and this political idea. I don't want to be subjugated by this entity that is ruled by a Führer of the Russian world and their policies and political culture based on the 16th century beliefs.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points there, and there's a lot to unpack. I would like to add to you're talking about they're not going to be able to forcibly, violently change Kiev to be pro-Russian. That's not going to happen. You talk about how the identity of Rus will no longer be solely the dominion of Moscow. Kiev will also have an answer to the idea of what it is to be Rus. But I'd like to add to that list the dominion of the Black Sea. And I don't think they have the capacity to take Odessa. Moscow's lost dominion of the Black Sea, and that's going to be awful for them. You talked a little bit there about the Biden mistakes. You also spoke a little bit about the new administration and their perspective. And this is something I definitely wanted to talk to you about, because not only have we heard it from certain sectors of the Trump administration's cabinet, we've heard it from the President of the United States himself, literally regurgitating almost word for word the communiques and the statements coming out of the Kremlin. To my mind, and having contacts within U.S. military and intelligence and defense and all sorts of things, Trump is compromised in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's just he sees the world the same way as Vladimir Putin, or whether there's something more nefarious going on, we don't know. But to have the president sit in the Oval Office and say things like there's an entire division of Ukrainian troops being encircled in Kursk when that was never the case, he's getting those talking points from somewhere. How concerned are you about the Trump administration's affinity for swallowing basically the I could use a more strong word, but the information coming out of Russia? How troublesome is that for you?
Well, we remember how Mr. Trump said that he believes Putin more than his intelligence community. And given Tulsi Gabbard as the director of national intelligence and her stand with regard to Russia, Ukraine, and actually Assad, even the official channel, I mean the intelligence community channels, may be polluted with these false assessments. But she talked about the major threats to the United States, and certainly Russia was among them. Yes, and actually, thank you that you brought Crimea into discussion. And I believe, and I share the point of General Hodges, who is saying that Crimea is the center of gravity of this war. And I believe if we are capable of cutting Crimea from the mainland of Russia, it may change the course of the war. It may crush Putin's regime. Could you imagine tens of thousands of Russian troops, FSB guys, and all those collaborators in Crimea, just packed and isolated from the mainland? It's going to be a crisis in Russia, and it's a huge blow to Putin. So I believe we should do, and we should strike the Kerch Bridge and those lines of communication. This is so-called land bridge via occupied territories. So it's crucially important to not to allow Russia to regain its dominance in the Black Sea. And once again, Crimea is not just the issue for Ukraine. It's not just the issue for the Black Sea NATO countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey. It's for Europe in general and for other regions, because without Crimea in Russian hands, Russians could not be. It could not be possible for Russians to project its power beyond the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, which is underbelly of European Union and NATO, to the Middle East and Northern Africa. So the Syrian campaign and the Russian bombing of civilians there that generated huge influx of refugees to Europe, shaken the political stability in many countries, including Germany. They may do this again. They relocated from Syria, obviously, but now they are in Libya, and they can escalate situation over there. And certainly they are in Africa, in the Sahel region, in Central African Republic, some other places, and they are playing like pirates. They are not capable of waging the full-fledged wars there or conquer some territories, but they are trying to bet on those bad guys and that want to expel Europeans or Americans out of there. And they can form this illiberal, let's say, union or something of those dictators in Africa, and they will affect Europeans and the rest of the world. So that's why Crimea is so important. And actually, you said that Trump is playing with Ukrainian cards, and he said, that Zelensky doesn't have cards. But in reality, he started and he gifted Putin with two major cards, like NATO membership and the international recognized body.
NATO membership.
Yeah,
to Ukraine.
Even not for Ukraine, he could have negotiated something for himself or for the United States. I will ban entry of Ukraine into NATO, and you will step back from China.
Yeah, instead he just gave it to him before talks even began.
And the second, and the two more cards, strong cards that we had, he compromised with this partial ceasefire. In the beginning, Ukrainians wanted to have a partial ceasefire in some domains, but Americans insisted it should be comprehensive and unconditional. We agreed. And then they talked to Russians, and the Russians said, no, we have these conditions, and it's unacceptable for Ukraine. And then we should talk about energy infrastructure, not just energy and infrastructure, like it's in the American readout after the meeting, but just energy infrastructure. In case of Ukraine or in case of Russia, they are targeting our energy facilities like electricity plants and some other things that we need for our households and for our economy. While we are targeting Russian oil refineries, which Russia needs to fuel their tanks and jets and to get hard currency from abroad to run their wartime economy. So it's asymmetry, and we were winning. According to some estimation, we took off 10% of the Russian refinery capacities. And we were stepping up our capabilities, and we were targeting more and more and further into the Russian territory. So this was a strong card of Ukraine, and now we don't have it. Even though Russians agreed on this ceasefire on energy infrastructure, so far they have targeted nine times they targeted Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So they do not obey even the word they gave to Mr. Trump. And the other thing with the Black Sea truce or ceasefire. In the beginning of war, Russians cut our lines of communication, and we were not able to sell our goods to the foreign markets. And it was not just put some economic burdens on Ukraine, because transiting these goods via railway is much more expensive. But we had some tensions with our neighbors because they didn't want to have our agriculture products on their markets. So that's why it's so important to keep these lines of communication open. But what we did, we decimated their Black Sea fleet, and the remaining parts of the Black Sea fleet was sent off to Chemchira in occupied Georgia or Novorossiysk. And they were not able to operate properly from that regions. But now they want to get these capabilities back into Crimea. And just a couple of days, they targeted Ukrainian cities with their missiles and drones from the Black Sea.
We here in Kiev came under attack.
So it's this ceasefire is disadvantageous for Ukraine, and I'm afraid that some other conditions that may be applied to us will be even more.
Well, look, here's one of the other problems. Aside from the fact that again, I do think there's something going on with Trump and his relationship with Putin, and it might just be as innocuous as, well, not innocuous, but as simple as, again, this kind of fellow traveler mentality and seeing the world the same way. But there's another issue with Trump in that he is very transactional. And this is not a secret. I'm not telling you anything. He says this publicly. I want something in return for securing a peace in Ukraine, whether or not it's the rare earth minerals or whether or not it's control over, certain power plants or whatever thing he might want to think to trade a quid pro quo for helping to negotiate a peace. How troubled are you about this transactional nature of President Trump?
Well, I'm more troubled with deeper forces in the United States, and I'm talking about several, let's say, streams or several groups of people. I recently I started to read Peter Dinan book, Regime Change, Post-Liberal Order. And this guy is a sort of the role model for G.D. Vance. And there are some other people like Dark Enlightenment movement and the Scripta movement with Peter Thiel, with his ideas that there should be, let's say, rule of those IT billionaires over the rest of America. And there is a movement so-called New Apostolic movement. So those forces that supported Trump during the election, and they believe that these pillars of republic should be reconstituted. They should be rebuilt. It means that not that Trump is a problem for the United States and for the rest of the world, in particular for Ukraine, but this problem may be preserved and may evolve into something that is dangerous for all of us. So I'm concerned about these deeper forces. Certainly, we are looking to the midterm elections, and we believe that there might be some changes, and Congress may regain these checks and balances, ability to impose checks and balances on Trump. But in general, yes, Trump's simplified worldview, his transactional approach is something that is damaging. And I believe that what we've seen during this Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, Trump, G.D. Vance, I didn't expect it. And I thought, firstly, oh, it is a diplomatic catastrophe for Ukraine. But after all, I realized that this was a blessing for Ukraine, for several reasons. First, there was an opinion poll by YouGov and The Economist, and more than half of Americans believed that Zelensky was not disrespectful towards Trump and G.D. Vance, and vice versa. Almost half of Americans believed that Trump was disrespectful towards Zelensky. And the reason for this spat was that Zelensky wanted to convey 2 points. First, they should not trust Putin. And second, Ukraine needs security guarantees even for ceasefire. So he didn't ask anything ridiculous or anything that was beyond manageable. The other after effect of this meeting was the huge wave of support from European and other foreign leaders to Ukraine. and to President Zelensky. There was an extraordinary summit in London, and then there was a meeting of 5 ministers of defense, and then the European bureaucrats met, and they decided to step up their support to Ukraine. And now the British and the French are talking about this reassurance force on Ukrainian territory. Mm-hmm. We don't know what shape it will take, what components, and actually I recommend to read a piece that I wrote with my colleagues in the RUSI, Royal United Service Institute. There is no something original in our writing. We just outlined 7 components of possible mission. We call this Operation Eastern Frontier, how our Western partners may back up Ukraine or provide us with this, it's a new fancy term, backstop to Ukraine. And we're not talking about...
And that would be like, these forces wouldn't necessarily be along the line of contact, but rather they would be in support and kind of logistical areas that are less risky. There's no safe place in Ukraine.
Well, we are not ruling out the boots on the ground that may fight. Certainly, we do not ask our partners. We understand it's not digestible for general public in Europe or particularly in the United States. But we could not rule it out for the simple reason. In 2014, the Obama administration didn't provide us with a single bullet. Mm-hmm. It was I would say not Mr. Trump, but James Mattis and H.R. McMaster, who decided that Ukraine need to get some javelins to deter Russia on the battlefield in Donetsk and Lugansk. At that time, the tank threat was real, and javelins were sort of a pretty good deterrence mechanism. Then there was a situation in 2021 when the Biden administration stopped assistance to Ukraine because they wanted to negotiate something with Putin. They realized that it's failing, and they began to provide us with more javelins and stingers. And then each and every time we cross a red line, and the Americans were providing us with more capabilities like howitzer, tanks, and we come to jets. So we would love, and what I'm saying that there is a possibility if, for example, Ukrainian forces are about to collapse, or Russia is capable of capturing Kharkiv, Dnipro, or some other major cities, the Europeans may revise their cautious approach, and they may step in with aim to not allow Russians to win and Ukrainian state to collapse.
How possible do you think that is, that there is going to be a Ukrainian collapse or some sort of major offensive that is going to smash through lines by the Russians, that there's going to be some sort of rout?
There is no chance at the moment, even without the American support, even though it's crucial. Without American support, we would lose more territory and more people, but certainly we will carry on our fighting for a simple reason. The nature of this war, it's a genocidal war. And we've seen in Bucha, Irpin, and Mariupol, the unofficial capital of Ukrainian Greeks, they were wiped out, and they were acts of genocide. So Ukrainians do not believe that it's possible to negotiate something with Putin. And actually, opinion polls showed that 80% of Ukrainians are against any legal territorial concessions to Russia. Only 5% are ready to concede some territories in return of so-called peace. 75% of Ukrainians are against withdrawing those troops from 4 regions where the war is raging on now. Mm-hmm. And the Russians want to claim the whole territories of those oblasts because then they rushed to write them into their constitution. So there is a will to fight. There is capability and growing capability because we are investing in our defense production. There is a huge role of drones, first and foremost, tactical ones. But for me, it's even more important that we are investing into the operational death drones. And we have some air power capabilities because our partners provided us with some F-16s. So
and Mirages. And a couple of other, there's a Swedish fighter.
I haven't heard about Gripens, but they're really capable and good ones. And I believe that we should bet more on European production rather than American, given that there is a kill switch. And we've seen it with...
And sadly, America is no longer a reliable partner. I mean...
Oh, I hope it will change. I hope there will be possibility for sane Republicans to unite against this madness, and for Democrats to come up with a new idea.
I mean, certainly the American people, by and large, support Ukraine. I've of course, I monitor these kind of things, and I talk to people, and I would be very comfortable in saying that the overwhelming majority of the American population supports Ukraine. How do we explain this to Americans better? Why it's in their interests? Trump seems to break off Ukraine, like whatever happens over there will not affect us. We're gonna transfer to Asia, and that's been kind of a policy for America for a while. That's nothing out of the ordinary. But how do we explain to Americans? No, this still matters. This is really important.
Well, first of all, thank you, Philip, for what you're doing and reaching out to Americans to explain why it matters for them. And fortunately, we have a pretty strong support. Actually, recently, when there was this protest against Trump tariffs and this turmoil he put markets into, there were Ukrainian flags, and the Ukrainian, Ukraine appeared on the posters over there. So Ukraine is a sort of a marker. Because it's a matter of principle, a matter of morale, it's a matter of moral values that the Americans are sharing. And I believe there are several ways how we should approach the general public. We cannot pursue to Trump that it's moral to support Ukraine. It's a national interest to defeat Russia in Ukraine, not to allow Russia to be an enabler of DPRK, PRC, or Iran, or Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and many other ugly regimes across the globe that are a threat to the United States or their allies like Israel or Europe. We cannot do this, but we can talk to those, I would say, sane Republicans, and there are some of them at least, and they do not shy away from Ukraine. And there were several pieces of legislation they introduced, to impose more sanctions on Russia and some other things. But we need to focus more on the grassroots and those who are the constituencies of Trump. And I would divide this group into several, target audiences. First and foremost, it's evangelic. And I believe that something that my colleague Ungurian, who is the chief of this national prayer breakfast in Ukraine, and he's acquainted with a number of top-level Republicans, including former Vice President Pence. So he's bringing some evangelics here, and some former military conservative guys here, and then he's showing Bucha in some other places, and he allows them to talk to the military and the volunteers and the ordinary people, so they can get this message from Ukraine that Ukrainian is in general conservative and a Christian nation. The other direction is the military and veterans, because who can understand the other veteran as the American veteran. They fought many wars, and certainly America is engaged in many conflicts across the globe, and they can understand what our guys are fighting for. And then we should reach out to women audience, because killing Ukrainian children,
kidnapping and killing,
yes, is something is terrible, and with this human story, change the mind of a lot of people. And yes, thank you for mentioning this deportation of Ukrainian.
No, it's ethnic cleansing.
It was one of the reasons why Putin was issued the warrant from the International Criminal Court, because it's an act of genocide. And we can talk to farmers, because the Russians were mining our fields. They were robbing our farmers, their combines and the equipment, and they are selling our grain. They have stolen it, and they are selling to the foreign markets as the Russian. So it's against not just the principles of international law or just law in general, but it's something that is undermining the whole idea of people, harvesting something and then getting profit out of it. So it's better to crush Russia in Ukraine, to secure Europe, and thus helping, let's say, French and the British to allocate some forces to help the United States in the Pacific. So it's a natural thing. If there was Zbigniew Brzezinski, he would explain it easily that, it's a grand chessboard. And you cannot just forget about the player who is playing against you, just hoping that it will do nothing.
And even a pawn or a squire or a knight or a rook, they all have their parts to play. So from our side of the chessboard, valuing each and every member is important, and I think that's something we need to mention. I also would like to also add, I think, yes, breaking Russia on the anvil of Ukraine is ultimately, in a geopolitical sense, beneficial to the United States, but also a strong and sovereign Ukraine is good for the West. So I'd like to add that, and I want to go back to one other item we were discussing about messaging towards Americans and how to get people on side, and I'd like your input on this question. We've had trouble relaying to the American people, especially those who are opposed to supporting Ukraine or skeptical of supporting Ukraine, that the money is spent in the United States. The money doesn't go. We don't put pallets of money in the back of airplanes and fly them to Poland and put them on trains to Ukraine. No. Those are spent at Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, and it supports the American economy, because I've heard a lot of this "I want my money back" mentality from the Trump kind of MAGA crowd, and we need to get that message out more. That no, we're spending money in America. However, and this is what I'm rounding around to the question, is there's also recently been discussion of that Ukraine would start spending part of its GDP or other money grants that are given to it from a variety of locations in actively going to the U.S. market and taking GDP, Ukrainian GDP, or what other, however else they get funds, and benefiting the American military industry. What do you think about that concept of, like, not only just spending money, the Americans spending money and sending kit over here, but the Ukrainians themselves starting to buy directly from the U.S.?
Oh, well, first of all, two complicated ideas. The United States is one of the core sources in contemporary international system, and by just uninstalling the United States from the system would not lead to peace and security for the United States. It means that these gaps will be filled with Xi Jinping, Putin, Kim Jong-un, and other guys. The second complicated or complex idea that we should not, and people should not think in transactional approach. So the United States bear a burden of security in Europe since 1945. But it's benefited in many ways. First, there was no spread of this communist disease in Europe and elsewhere, so they were deterring it. And Europe was rebuilt with American dollars, American technologies, and American workers. And American soldiers who withdrew from the European fronts benefited because they came to plants and other enterprises to support Europeans. And there was this interconnection of economies. And the Americans had a privileged access to the market, European market in general, share of ideas, people, technology, money, and many, many other things. And Europeans, even though we can criticize Europeans for all those years, but they were loyal allies of the United States. So if Americans are abandoning Europeans or Ukrainians, it means that they will not find any other real allies who would follow the United States, not for money, not for some deals, but because of the example of this country. The great strength of the United States is not money, it's not dollar, it's an idea. And if Americans are ready to abandon this idea, this appeal to other nations, it means that it will lose in trade, in technology, and many other things. Helping Ukraine or Europe to defend itself or to Russia it's the beneficial for American public. It means that you have allies, you have a common space, at least for now, because Trump is trying to erode this space, trade and change of goods and people and money. The other thing that what we are doing, certainly we don't have many high-tech companies here in Ukraine. We do not produce jets, sophisticated missiles, satellites. We can produce parts of that. But we produce many drones and other technologies that are enablers. And we are doing it much better than Raytheon, Boeing, whatever other.
5 million drones a year is the estimate? The capacity?
Well, yeah, but no, it's not about the number. But we are just, let's say, the tactical drones. Sometimes our guys are adjusting software twice a day. You cannot imagine Boeing adjusting their drones twice a month or half of a year. And certainly we're in time of war, and we have this experience, and we conceptualize what is happening. So we're center of this knowledge and know-how, and it's hugely important for the United States because it wants to be prevailing power everywhere, and particularly in the Pacific. So I believe our Taiwanese friends would love to have sea drones that like we have. Because there will be possibly assault, the sea assault. So we can do this thing, and certainly we are interested in investment in our capacities, and we are interested in joint research and development, because there are some technologies and components that are not accessible for us, and that are available in the United States. And if we can get that and we can improve, it will be peanuts for this improvement, but the huge success of the businesses. And yes, if you're talking about this real Earth materials deal. In the beginning, it was Ukraine's initiative. President Zelensky wanted to have American security guarantees. And certainly we want to be members of NATO because we do not believe that any other guarantees would deter Russia from future aggression. And for that, we were ready to pay with Ukrainian natural resources, something that we already exploit and some that they need some investment. But Trump decided to play a robbery game because the first draft was not acceptable to Ukraine. Then there was a modest and there was a fair framework agreement. And now the Secretary Bethard came with actually blackmail. That was, we were losing our resources for nothing because Trump doesn't want to provide us with security guarantees, but he wants to sell Ukraine to Russia. I believe that for Trump administration, we are an obstacle for this reset with Russia. Just because we want to survive, we are fighting on, and we do not agree on these terms that the Russians send to us via Americans. And they're not happy with that. But look, they want to sell us to Russian, and they want us to pay a heavy price for that in terms of this access to these resources. I don't think it's fair, but it may be fair if we have like 50-50 investment into our industry, and you know that the importance of rare materials is huge. It's everywhere in our gadgets. It's in missiles, in the nuclear submarines, whatever. And the Chinese control majority of those resources and processing all those resources. So Ukraine is a pretty good partner for that, and we are willing to be partners of the United States. So we are not refusing, but we want to have fair deal with some security guarantees for that. Yeah. And we are ready to buy American weapons. And actually, you said that, and actually it's true that out of almost $180 billion that have been provided to Ukraine, the lion's share, up to 80%, were spent on the American, or to replenish American stockpiles. And for me, it's an interesting issue. I didn't dig into it yet. This PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority, it's the instrument for the president to provide Ukraine with some off-the-shelf, let's say, solutions that you have in your stockpiles of the Pentagon. And usually it was the outdated and old equipment and ammunition. And then they were spending this money allocated by the Congress to replenish it. So let's say the 155 millimeter shell that might be, let's say, 10 years old, 15 years old, may cost not $1,000. I'm just like, I'm not talking about real terms, but not $1,000 because it's old, and in a couple of years
they're going to have to dispose of it. There's going to be a cost for that anyhow.
It may cost, let's say, half of this, let's say $500. But with the aim to replenish it, the Biden administration were buying from the industry as a new shell for $1,000. So I believe if we recalculate this amount of money being spent to replenish
right, so that the sum actually didn't reflect the worth of the items that were being, because they had already aged and they were calculating this from a shell that might have just come off the assembly line. Do I understand?
Yeah, absolutely. There were some parts like missile interceptors or something that they were ordered and they were from the factory to Ukrainian battlefield. But in general, the lion's share of what has been provided to Ukraine was not a new equipment and was not highly sophisticated equipment. Even if the United States have not provided us with a single F-16. So it's and I know back in 2006 there was a Hurricane Katrina, and I was a part of a mission to deliver humanitarian aid to Little Rock in Arkansas, and we landed on the military base there, and while we were, and actually it was a Ruslan aircraft, one of the largest in the world. So I saw up to horizon the cargo and the jets, the fighting jets of previous era. So it was possible for the Biden administration or for Trump administration to provide us with these capabilities because they are just like certainly they needed to be updated, but they worth nothing, and I'm not sure that the United States would employ them if there is a conflict somewhere. So it was like a win-win solution, but unfortunately, Biden administration was self-constrained and they didn't do these things. So anyway, we are ready to buy some equipment from the United States, particularly air defense, some components for drones and electronic warfare. We don't have enough resources to buy sophisticated weapons, and possibly we don't need F-35s or something like that. We don't need...
we got a lot of Bradleys you guys can have.
Yeah, sure. So we're ready to buy, but we're limited in our capacity. So
one of the reasons why I think maybe this is also a difficult thing to sell to the American people is because there's a concept, there's a kind of, I think, dual issues here. One that this is a way of like a slush fund. This is a way of laundering money, and that, we're willing to, just flood the zone with money and, let the Ukrainians fight to the last Ukrainian soldiers. It's all very cynical perspective. There's that narrative that is being sold to Americans, that it's a slush fund. And the other thing that's being sold is this is an unwinnable war. It's a forever war. As, a Ukrainian patriot, and this is somebody who worked for the Ministry of Defense, outline for me, please, those two arguments and your response to them. One, that this is just a way for people to get rich, and two, that this is a war that's unwinnable and going to go on forever. And of course, that would mean, what is your perspective of the situation on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, there was not a single case of misuse of those resources, and actually the lion's share of the defense assistance provided to Ukraine went directly to the front line. So there were several cases of light armor being stopped by our bodyguards on the border, and you can imagine that we are fighting a war in the large-scale war, and there might be some cases of people trying to sell some rifles or some grenade launchers or whatever. But there was not a single case of a serious high-tech equipment, American equipment, that was captured on the border. And there was no single case of corruption either in Ukraine or in the United States. Because I understand that for the domestic political reasons, Trump, and not just Trump, his circles, accuse Biden of, let's say, the laundering of money and putting them in their pocket, which is not true because there is no single case of that. It's just like rumors and conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. And majority of those funds went directly to the defense enterprises. And
I don't think Americans know how scandalous it would be in Ukraine if while men are dying at the front line, it was found out that these weapon systems were being misappropriated. I mean, heads would roll in Ukraine. And also, Ukrainians understand they're fighting in an existential fight. So the idea that they would receive weapons and then sell it on the black market, the risk to reward for somebody who was doing that, if you were a Ukrainian, found doing that, you'd be in big trouble.
But you know that after any siren and after any missile or drone attack, usually Ukrainians are just donating money to some. We have several funds who are buying weapons for our military. I mean, it's a non-governmental funds. And we buy bonds, the governmental bonds for our defense industry. Mm-hmm. So we are paying taxes, and in addition, we are trying to help our guys on the front line. We are buying weapons for them from our income. And certainly, if there is a case that someone misuse money or try to sell weapons on black market, certainly it's not the government that Ukrainian society would not tolerate.
No,
and that's why there were no cases of that. We're critical of our government, and there are some cases of corruption, buying some food for military and some other things, but not related to weapons, because you're absolutely right. It's a struggle for our survival. The other thing is that those things related to the domestic affairs of the United States. Unfortunately, back in 2016, Ukraine became a domestic political factor for Mr. Trump. He believed that Ukraine was on the side of Hillary Clinton, that allegedly some servers from Ukraine interfered into the American servers, and then there was a notorious phone call, perfect phone call between Zelensky and Trump that triggered the impeachment process, and suddenly the Democrats weaponized Ukrainian issue, and they were hunting Trump and his supporters with that. But it's their business, I mean, American business. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, for many MAGA people, they decided it's a Russia hawk, that the Ukrainians are corrupt and they were playing more for Democrats and so on, which is not true. It's like a rule for any Ukrainian member of parliament or governmental representatives, or even for non-governmental actors, to meet equally with Republicans and Democrats. So I've been to the United States several times for these 3 years, and it's a part of parliamentary delegation. And I've been to all those meetings, and it was absolutely natural thing to talk to both parties and both chambers over there. So what I'm saying that we were sort of a factor, the domestic political factor for Trump administration, and unfortunately, Democrats played this game as well. Mm-hmm. And that's why the ordinary Americans may believe that there is a corruption scheme, and Biden was, cashing Zelensky, and he was laundering this money and getting it back, which is not the case. So the reason for the Americans to support Ukraine, there are many, and starting from moral, because it was immoral from Russia to violate dozens of bilateral agreements, but most importantly, the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act about the inavailability of borders and unacceptability of annexation of territories and other things.
By force of arms.
So. Yeah. The law, and it's a philosophical thing, my predecessors, ancient Greeks, decided that not a king should rule the people, but the abstract principle, law, something that is agreed upon citizens. And I believe the American Republic is built on the ideas of ancient Greece, Roman Republic, Enlightenment, and then some thinking of the British philosophers. So there should be principle. And international law is something like its replication of this idea into the international state. There is no authority in the world. There is no police. There is no, let's say, full institutions like in each and every state. But we need to have some rules. Otherwise, it will be chaos. It will be war, everyone against everyone. And that's why it's so important to preserve Ukrainian territorial integrity. It was just once since 1945 when Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. And the Americans with their allies stopped this invasion and they reversed this annexation. And there was no more annexation since then. If we allow to happen and to agree that we have lost territories and the Russian may legally use these territories as their own, it means that Xi Jinping is saying I need this reunification with Taiwan. Some other guys would say, in Latin America, in Africa, and particularly in Africa, because these colonial powers we are dividing Africa into the states. So it's going to be a huge impetus to all those destruction forces, and Americans will suffer. Everybody will suffer, but Americans because they depend on many things like freedom of negation. If there are no rules, it means that freedom of negation is under the threat, and there will be some parts of territories dominated by local or regional hegemons. Then these chains of supply. For each and every product, you buy something from Africa, Latin America, or it is assembled somewhere. So it will affect the daily life of every American. And now with this tariff wars, Americans feel it's on their pockets, how the prices of their daily needs like vegetables and other commodities and groceries, it's a fancy word in Trump's vocabulary. Not to mention the high tech, like iPhone would cost $300 more just because of tariffs over China, or I don't know the price of Tesla now. And I believe there would be among friends. We decided to have a bet on who is going to be kicked off the administration first: Marco Rubio, Witkofff, or Musk. And it seems to be Musk will be the first one because he is not happy with these tariffs against China, and he depends on China heavily. And Marco Rubio still believes that he can do good with this administration, and we've seen how.
Do you think he can? Do you think there can be a negotiated ceasefire? What do we have to go through to get to that end result?
It's highly unlikely for the reason that the Russians believe that Trump is selling Ukraine to them, and they can demand more and more. Secondly, they believe that without American support, and there is no appetite for the Trump administration to request new allocation of resources from the Congress. And certainly we will be more vulnerable, particularly in terms of air defense. And the Russians are trying to amass more people, and there is the decree to mobilize 160,000 additional forces. And the Russians believe that they can push further into Ukraine, and they don't obey this agreement with Trump on the partial ceasefire relating to energy infrastructure and the Black Sea. So there are no signs that Russia wants to have even this ceasefire. While they are negotiating modalities, they like this word, of this ceasefire, they are killing us, and they are accumulating resources for further invasion. And actually, a couple of days ago, our president and then the chief of defense, not the supreme commander, said that it seems that the Russians started the new large-scale offensive. Yeah. It may be true. But what I'm saying, they believe that can get some success on the ground while negotiating more favorable terms of this peace deal with Trump administration. But Ukrainian public is not going to accept it. Even without American support, even with the pressure from this administration, we are not going to stop for the simple reason, as I explained, we consider this war as a genocidal. And I don't know. I'm interested in history. I read a lot of things. I haven't heard of any cases of a negotiated solution to genocide.
Yeah.
So it's either genocide is committed and there is no more victims, or it is stopped by forces external or by those forces who are fighting back.
I have been out east. I've seen the defenses. I have lived in Ukraine for the last 3 years, the full-scale invasion, and 25 years of coming here throughout the country's recent history. Having known the nature of the Ukrainian people, having seen the resistance, having seen the physical defenses that are out there, even with 160,000 more conscripts that Russia might field, I don't think they can achieve their strategic goals, and that is, as we earlier discussed, changing the government in Kiev, changing the concept of identity between Rus, what it is to be Rus, and dominion over the Black Sea and Crimea. Let me kind of round up our conversation. Thank you again for coming, and please, if you've enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button and get the alarm bell. But I want to ask you, as a Ukrainian, as a former advisor to the Ministry of Defense, and I'm sure privy to a lot of information, what is your prognosis of the conduct of the war? How is it now, and what is your estimation about where we are headed with this conflict?
As von Clausewitz said, that war is a politics by other means, and certainly it's not that the victory in one particular area that would change the course of this war and bring us to peace, but the how we can transcend this success into or loss into the political solution. But I don't think anything coming of this kind at the moment, because we have resources, we have partners who support us, Europeans. We have will to resist. We have demographic resources. We have some troubles with mobilization for sure, but there are many reasons for that, and particularly this pause of assistance for 7 months from the United States, and that the Western partners are not providing us with capabilities that we need to fight a modern warfare. And certainly it's one thing you're driving the Soviet or Ukrainian tank, and the other thing is even old Bradley Striker. The chances to survive are much higher, and this means that people are not afraid to get into the infantry or something else. And certainly if we get air power and other things, it means that there will be less pressure on guys in the trenches. We would be able to target Russians in operational depths. So if there is an efficient supply of capabilities that we need for the modern day warfare, there would be more willing Ukrainians to fight, like it was 22 and it was in 23. So we are ready to fight on, and we have resources and we have the will. So Russians have the same. They have troubles in economy with labor market, inflation, and some other things, and they are reaching their peak of production of weapons or refurbishment of this old Soviet crap. But certainly they are not interested in stopping this war, and particularly there is a huge challenge for Russia what to do with all those guys who are fighting against us for money. And they will be back and they will not be provided with pretty good jobs. And they're a bit crazy killing Ukrainians, and that's why they will. And actually, there are many cases of violence, home violence, and the violence on the streets of those guys, because the Russian state does not care about these people. I mean, psychologically, and they are not reintegrating them. So it's a challenge for Putin to stop this war machine. Not to mention economy. He needs to replenish all those lost resources for the next war against Ukraine or any other European state. So that's why there is a will and there are resources in Russia as well to carry on this war. And if we achieve this temporary ceasefire, The war will erupt just like in a couple of months or in a year for the simple reason, because we didn't solve our political problems with Russia. They want to subjugate us. We want to survive and be a democratic European independent state. So that's why the war, there is no end to this war now. And the only solution to this war is a military solution. Ukraine is capable of doing this if there is enough and efficient support and capabilities. While the Russians reach their capabilities, they cannot fight this maneuverable war because we destroyed their professional army in the first 2 years, and they don't have enough time to regenerate those professional. They need more technology and access to technology to build new type of weapons and other things. So that's why I do not believe in peace with Russia anytime soon. Ukrainian society against all those so-called compromises, because there are no compromises from Russia's side. They just stop war and that's it. They want to compromise. But they can resume it in any time in the future. There are no security guarantees that may stop Russia from reigniting this conflict. So I believe that it's unlikely that we will have this long-term ceasefire. And when we start to talk to Americans about these peace terms, there will be crisis in our relations, even deeper than we've seen during this Oval Office meeting, because we cannot accept those terms. But Trump doesn't care about the, let's say, terms of this solution, because he wants to get rid of Ukraine and relaunch relations with Russia, try to get it from China, get lucrative deals on Russian energy and raw materials, decide the fate of other nations sitting around the table with Putin, like in the Middle East and somewhere else. So that's why we will be in crisis. But fortunately, I believe that if I read the nature of Mr. Trump correctly, he will lose interest in Ukraine. He will say they are not, they don't want peace, and let's leave them for the Europeans to care. And fortunately, as you begin this conversation, in the beginning of this conversation, I said that Europeans finally have woken up. They understand that we are buying time for them to strengthen their defense and deterrence capabilities, and they understand that Ukraine is a crucially important security factor for the future of Europe. So it's my hope that Europeans will be more aggressive in what they are doing in supporting Ukraine, invest in our defense, providing us with assistance, and particularly, it's just, I repeat it again and again, with proper capabilities, air power missiles and some other. Certainly we need armor, we need shells and other things. But without air power and missiles, we will be losing more people for just like tiny pieces of land. But we need to win this war on different level. Striking Russian command and control, logistic forces in operational depths, not allowing them to concentrate and to unleash their forces on our guys in the trenches. So that's why I believe it's possible to beat Russians in Ukraine. We've seen they were not able to conquer us for these 3 years, and this war started with no support from our Western partners. There was just Javelins and Stingers, and the rest was Ukrainian and Soviet weaponry. And we managed to stop Russian advances. And then after that, the Americans decided to provide more and more assistance to Ukraine. So with the influx of right capabilities, we can beat Russians, and it will be good not just for Ukraine, not just for Europe and the United States, but for Russians themselves. They will turn to their domestic troubles. They would understand that this war was useless. Actually, if I were Putin, I would continue undermine Ukrainian sovereignty by so-called hybrid war, supporting the Russian Orthodox Church, pro-Russian forces in parliament, and so on and so on. It was the most efficient and cheap way how to undermine Ukrainian statehood. And the same thing was about the Europeans. they were selling gas to Angela Merkel, undermining European unity and deterring Europeans from taking decisive actions to deter Russia or stop Russia elsewhere. So it was the most wise strategy that the Russians could come up with. But they decided to...
I think one of the greatest dangers from a renewed and reinvigorated Moscow is this concept of hybrid war, where they control the minds of the populace and they infiltrate the body politic in order to manipulate our political decisions and our decision making. I know, however, that the vast majority of the American people in particular, and also, of course, in Europe, are still very much in support of Ukrainians and victory in Ukraine. And Europeans in particular, you're right. We've both agreed that they're waking up, because there doesn't have to be a Russian tank on the Champs-Élysées or a Russian soldier standing a post at Buckingham Palace for them to intimidate and threaten Europe into submitting to Moscow's will. And I think we all need to be considering that. And of course, you're right, Ukrainians are exhausted. I'm exhausted. I'd love to go home. I really would. But without a just peace and without a lasting peace, it can't be for nothing. And it will only... it will only embolden Moscow further. Before we close up, is there anything else you'd like to say to my audience, or to point out about Ukraine?
If I may,
of course.
Not about Ukraine, but mostly about the United States. I spent 25 years studying the United States. I started my diplomatic career as US and Canada desk officer. And certainly, one thing that I don't want to appear here in Ukraine is anti-Americanism. So I like your republic because, the idea they are really appealing to many Ukrainians. And I would love to have more American style of democracy, not the contemporary, but in general, rather than European. So we need to have a competitive, dynamic political system that would unleash the ingenuity and the talent of Ukrainian people. I like not just American, but the British, and certainly your system have roots in the British system as well. So America is closer to my heart, and certainly we appreciate that the United States has done since 2014, and because there was support, unofficial support from American people, and certainly from 2022. Even though we can criticize the Biden administration, but they realized that this struggle against evil, a struggle between authoritarian and democratic regime. We are young democracy. We are not far from being perfect, and we are not happy as Ukrainians with the state of democracy here. But we want to preserve and develop it. We don't want to be autocratic and the Tsarist-like Russia. So there is a sharp difference between our mindsets in Russians and in Ukrainians. And so that's why we need more the United States in Ukraine and Europe rather than less. And the United States has played a positive role in history, at least since 1945. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that it would be right for the United States to forget it and retreat from the global stage. It will be disadvantageous for Ukraine, Europe, in many other countries across the globe. So that's why I would call American citizens to support Ukraine, because it's just cause, because it's in interest from financial, industrial, and other points, and for the security reasons as well. And because we share the same ideas, we would love to be striving democracy. We would love to share our wealth with our partners and enrich each other. We can contribute greatly to technology and other in social practices as well. We are pretty good in networking and resilience and other things that I believe American society would need. And we have many components dear to American hearts. Like we're Christian, mostly Orthodox or Catholic or Greek Catholic. We have a Muslim population, which is a part of Ukrainian political political system.
And well respected.
Yeah, and just like we are an example how we can live together, Christians and Muslims, without any conflicts.
And Jews.
Jews, we have a president.
Absolutely.
And so we don't care about ethnicity, language, religion, whatever. If you cherish our identity, our values. You are Ukrainian. It doesn't matter what, and even if you have an American passport, but you just like you love this country and people, so we consider you as Ukrainian. So we're open society in this regard.
And multicultural. And the idea of Ukraine, very much like the idea of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, these are all similar families of democratic ideals. Oleksandr Khara, I appreciate your time.
It's been a
appreciate
pleasure.
you coming here and talking to this. And among all the other things that you have mentioned that we can do globally and as partner nations and allies, the other thing that we can do is continue to fight the information war. And so that's what we are doing here today. And for the time that you have spent coming and speaking to us and trying to clarify these things and get the message out to my audience, we are extremely grateful.
Thank you. I highly appreciate it.
All right, then.